Welcome to today's CRM Magazine web event, brought to you by Transversal. I'm David Myron, Editorial Director for CRM Magazine, and I'll be the moderator for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled, Key Strategies on How to Measure, Improve, and Leverage Knowledge to Achieve World-Class Results. Before we start, allow me to explain how you can participate in this live broadcast. At the end of the event, there will be a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the Submit button. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but if your question has not been answered during the show, you will receive an email response to it within a few days. Now I'll introduce our speakers for today's event. Gary Lucas is the Head of Customer Experience at First Central, and Chris Hall is the Chief Marketing Officer at Transversal. To review the speakers' bios, please click on the speaker icon on the bottom of the console. And without further ado, let me now pass the event over to our presenter, Gary Lucas, Head of Customer Experience at First Central. Welcome to the broadcast, Gary.
Good afternoon and good morning to all of you. Our story started a couple of years ago, not long after I joined First Central in September 2012. One of the problems that we had is that how could we improve the customer experience, or the choice for our customers, whilst also improving our efficiency and reducing costs. So some of the challenges we faced was what sort of insight could we obtain to understand our customer needs, and why do customers need to contact us? We think we know the answer, but do we really? And how do we remove those unnecessary emails and calls into the contact center? How do we ensure that consistency in our response? We might train agents, but agents can still give a slightly different answer to a very similar question, depending on who's asking that question. Are we indeed giving the right answers? And are our customers satisfied with the response that we do actually give them? What are the common questions? Are there any themes or areas that may be more important than we first realized? And is there a solution out there that provides 24/7 accessibility for our customers, as opposed to ensuring that they have to call us during the hours that suit us? Once we had decided that First Central was our provider of choice, the next step was how can we actually implement such a solution, and in what time frame? What we agreed after signing the contracts, obviously, was a 6-week turnaround for a 3-month pilot. We had a number of existing static FAQs, and by static, literally a long list of questions and answers. So the case there was really to review those and add or implement in order to apply them to the new software. During the time that we were reviewing these questions, Transversal were building the portal for us. In addition, we created a new URL to link to the Transversal hosting. In addition to that, we agreed an internal process and appointed a compliance champion. In this case, it was me. And by that, I mean somebody who could review the answers, given that these are not sales questions, but actually from a compliant perspective and consistency, ensure that we were providing a similar tone of voice across all of those FAQs. As part of the overall exercise, it was important to create some monthly reporting where we could do a deep dive into the performance and the findings, and ultimately identify ongoing improvements. Now, how it looks today is slightly different to how it looked previously by virtue of a new site that we launched. But what we've done here is to try and identify the areas to sort of draw customers' attention as to how they might want to ask us a question. In addition to various points throughout the website, we've also added in links within our quote and buy site, so that's the application form. We have a customer login portal where customers can access their documents, so we put a link in there. We've added links to emails. We also mention in our IVRs when customers call, if, for example, they are waiting to be answered, we point them back online if they want to try and self-service. And so on the top right of the screen in front of you, we also introduced a search function where customers would type in their question, and that would take them through to the necessary portal. So what have we found? Well, so we introduced this in December 2012 on a 3-month pilot. And then after the 3 months, we subsequently took out an annual contract because it made perfect sense. And as you can see by the slide in front of you now, we've seen massive growth over those months since we first launched. Now, for those of you who are wondering why it suddenly jumped up in August and September of this year, in August is when we launched our new site, the site that is now available today, where we also added that additional search functionality. The point being that these are the number of people who are searching for questions on our site, where previously they may have picked up the phone. That is not to suggest that every single one would have picked up a call, but if you start to look at the volumes, you get an idea as to how many people have queries or questions they just want to ask us. That's also a mixture of people, both new and existing customers. In addition to the volume, we also look at, for example, the relevancy score. Now, the relevancy score is a sort of a transversal algorithm that's based on the quality of our answer determined by the engine. Essentially what that means is, depending on the question, how good is the answer and in terms of how relevant it is to the question that's being asked. On the table in front of you, you can see how we have moved a number of the questions higher up the relevancy score as we have further refined over a period of time. This is further borne out by the ratings that we ask our customers in terms of, well, okay, you've asked us a question, we've given you an answer, what do you think of the answer? And it's quite important to also understand how you couch that particular question, because in one sense, you might give the correct answer to a fairly straightforward question, but that doesn't mean the customer is particularly satisfied with your answer if it's not the answer they really wanted. So again, we sort of had to play around with what is it we want to actually tease out from our customers. So once we determined how to ask them, how they sort of scored our particular answer to the question, again, over time, and I picked out 4 here, we've got particular scores against sort of key questions that we know customers are asking. And what we do is we say we take the answers, we look at the scores, we understand why they're scoring us as they do, and then we'll change the answer, especially, for example, if we get 0 or very low scores. And again, the point here is it's very much an evolutionary process. You don't just launch it, you constantly enhance it and you add to it. Another good metric here is with regards to the popularity of the particular questions. Certainly what we found over the last few, probably months, is that the top 10 FAQs don't really change very much, which very much explains that the consistency of the customers and the types of queries they have. But what we tend to do with these, which we couldn't do with the static FAQs that we had previously, is understand how many people were searching for a particular question, and indeed what that particular question and trend may mean. So if I can just work through some of these for the moment. The what is your telephone number at 19% is clearly sort of the most popular question that people are asking us. And what we tend to find with that is our existing customers and not new customers. But it does beg the question as to whether we need to add our telephone number in to more areas within our website, because clearly a number of customers can't seem to find it easily, or indeed within their documentation. The counter to that, given the earlier idea of obviously trying to reduce unnecessary calls, is that if we introduce telephone numbers, depending on where we introduce them, will that drive more calls, or, as other evidence has been suggested to us, it gives customers, in some instances, more confidence because there is a telephone number available and therefore they won't actually phone it. So it's trying to get the balance right, and that's something that we're going to be sort of testing over the coming weeks and months. In terms of the online servicing capability, we were a bit surprised until we saw the results, just how many people are keen to self-serve in terms of changing their own policy. And as a result of the findings from this particular exercise, we are very much in the final phases of launching our first stage online mid-term adjustment facility. For example, changing your vehicle, changing your mileage, and a number of other features. And then on the back of that, because that will obviously take calls out of the contact center, we will look at the results and then add additional functionality for the customer to self-serve, which of course is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year, and again takes calls out of the contact center. In terms of the selling point, does my policy cover me to drive other cars? This is a benefit that we have in the UK and obviously exists in other countries, where, again, until we had the insight, we didn't realize that customers at the point of purchase were not aware whether they did or did not have the ability to drive other cars as part of the insurance product they were buying from us. There were a couple of areas where customers could link through, but again, the point being it wasn't obvious. So we are in the throes of changing the presentation screen to alert customers this price includes the ability to drive other cars, or this price does not include the ability to drive other cars. So again, improving the customer experience and making it easier for them to come to an informed decision. And finally, in terms of insight into service issues and requirements for clearer messaging in our web journey, again, through this insight, we discovered that a number of customers were having trouble accessing their documents through the online portal. And it wasn't until we did some further investigation we realized there was a certain sort of sector or tranche of business which couldn't actually access the documents. And as a consequence, we've managed to put a fix in to make that much easier for our customers. Now again, without having the insight behind who is asking what questions, do the questions change over time, we just would not have learned any of these factors and issues that customers were experiencing. Therefore, it's sort of been a great tool in that respect for understanding customer changes and requirements. So in terms of what's next for us, as I mentioned earlier, it is a case of continually improving and evolving. Now, this has been in situ for 2 years now, and we have probably added a further 50, maybe 75% questions to the original 175 questions that we had. And every time somebody asks a question where we don't currently have an answer, it is simply a case of sourcing an answer from the appropriate department, ensuring it's written in the same tone of voice as all the other FAQs that we have, and then we will publish that. Plus, well, we have had the odd incident in the past where our contact center, for example, has been overrun, shall we say. We have the ability to put up an instant message within the portal that as soon as customers access, for example, they're ringing, they're waiting, they can't get through, so they'll try our FAQ link and it'll come up and we'll say to them, we are experiencing sort of high call volumes and explain why, and we can update that. And that's something, again, that we wouldn't have been able to do previously. So it's a continual development of the existing FAQs that we have, in addition to an area where customers can go and understand updates based on what else is happening. In light of the self-service, as I mentioned previously, we're looking to sort of further establish the particular needs of the customers and how we might change those. It's important also to integrate with analytics. We have Google Analytics at the moment. We are just about to launch a product called Session Cam, which enables us to understand the exact customer journey by replaying where they went. And we're also adding a third analytics tool. And again, by linking this particular tool with our analytics, provides us with greater insight to understand what customers are doing, why they are doing it, and how we can make it even easier for them. An additional piece that we're also close to adding is the contextual FAQs within the customer website. So depending on which stage or which page of the website you are on, if a customer hits the link, we will put up what we believe to be the top FAQs that they are looking for relevant to the page they are on, rather than just all the FAQs that may have been asked over the last day, week, month, etc. And we think that, again, will be very useful in helping the customers resolve their query sooner rather than later. And finally, we're also very close to going down the road of introducing the agent-facing FAQ facility, which is similar to that which is available for our customers, but would have additional insight which would only be for the agent. For example, an agent might have a query that he would ask his supervisor, what is the process for issuing a customer with proof of their no claims driving? That's not something that we would put in front of the customer, but we can put that in front of an agent. Or indeed, we can add additional commentary to an existing FAQ that exists for the customer, but with additional content for the agent should the customer ask a further question. So it's really a case of continuing to evolve and understand customer needs and then meet those customer needs by changing according to what they want. There is lots of noise around at the moment in terms of understanding, do we know what our customers want, or do we just assume we know what they want? If we go down the former, then we have a much better chance of meeting the customer needs and retaining those customers for longer for us. And that's all the question. Sorry, that's the points I wanted to raise.
Thank you, Gary. And that was a great presentation in regards to how to really forensically put in not only a knowledge solution, but really kind of taking customer experience to the next level. And that's what we're all about here at Transversal. We're all about connecting people to knowledge. And in light of knowing I was going to present after Gary, I wanted to basically put most of my presentation around metrics that we see in the knowledge arena. And I'll start out with the easy ones, and those are the ones that came out earlier this year. Gartner produced some great metrics around how KM projects drive a lot of great metrics. I'm hoping the report comes up at the right. There we go. And again, these are produced by Gartner. If they were marketing numbers, you typically might assume that they would be high, but I'm actually a lot lower in the past 20 years of gathering metrics around what KM can do for customer service. But we know that there are three areas that when people look at knowledge strategies, where they go after. They would go after either the efficiencies of the organization, whether it be agent efficiencies or whether it be customer efficiencies online. Or they're going after it from a deflection strategy. You're going to see some of the numbers here that Gartner produces are great around reduction in talk time and headcount shift, the reduction in emails. But the last thing, and probably the most important thing, and I'll take you through some examples today, are around customer experience, on how fast retrieval of the right information can really increase customer satisfaction. And Gary talked a lot about that in kind of his next generation rollout of really providing that contextual knowledge when the customer needs it most. Why not make it easier for them and have it right at hand versus have them look for it? So those are all the metrics that kind of make sense, but if you've listened to my presentations before, I try to make them a little edgy. So I wanted to talk about the metrics that you might not expect. For instance, it would be hard to find to have a knowledge company stand in front of you and say successful KM projects may adversely affect average handle time. As a matter of fact, in some cases, average handle times have increased 14% after rolling out a successful self-service strategy. And also in the area of email or escalations on level 2 have chosen to increase or have seemed to increase 8 to 12% on average. That's the first area I'll talk about. And the second area I'll talk about is why content isn't king. And actually eliminating the content or eliminating knowledge can increase online satisfaction. And statistically, eliminating half of the unnecessary content in some deployments that we've seen can increase customer satisfaction 12 to 20%. So that's the fun stuff. So let's drill into it from a deeper perspective, because I know most of you are probably looking at the very first thing I said and said, when is increasing average handle time ever a good thing? And I would expect many of you, if I were in your monitor right now, to have that face looking at me saying, this doesn't make sense. Because as contact center people and as suppliers of managers of customer service, it's all about managing supply versus demand. And we only have so much service capacity of people and staff that we can throw at the amount of excess capacity that's coming our way. And it's almost impossible as a customer service executive to ever get to the right-hand side where your lines are matching. That's a near impossible task. But to achieve optimum service levels, we understand you try to optimize workforce management, and that's all around people, how long they're on the phone, how long they're on each time, and in some cases it could be even around weather if your particular product or service is dealing around weather. We know that you want to outsource peak load times to external providers. We know you want to offshore some of your mainstream services, streamline your desktops around CTI, CRM, or multi-channel, and improve agent training. So I don't get why average handle time increasing is going to be a good thing. Let me kind of take you through the journey a little bit. About 7 or 8 years ago, I was involved in a study that did a service impact study of really good deployments of web self-service. It was specific to an industry. It was software companies and manufacturers of high-tech companies, and it was a rollout of about 5 different case studies of customers. And it was rolled out specifically in the first month to web self-service and rolled out additionally on the agent side 3 to 6 months after the original self-service deployment. What we found were the following. Overall, agent productivity improved, and I'll get into that in a moment. And overall, new hire proficiencies improved. So we ramped up our staff a lot faster. But what really happened was when we did great web self-service, and the greater it got, the customers became more intelligent. Caller sophistication levels increased, and call times increased on average around 14%. I'm not doing this to scare you because there's a good story at the end of this. But also level 2 cases increased. Call escalations increased on average between 8 and 12% per month. So you're telling me that if I do a really good self-service deployment, I'm going to drive up my average handle time. Yes, you are, to some extent and over a certain period of time. But here's kind of the good story at the end of it. I went back to that first slide. Remember about that customer satisfaction and trying to map those 2 lines together? If you start straightening out the capacity line, so what happened in all of the cases, 30 to 40% of them increase their online targeted adoption. And Gary talked a lot about that. It's a lot of hard work to find out what they're asking. But when you do, what you're really driving to is less calls and less emails per day, per hour, per month. Really controlling capacity really helps out your service capacity overall. Second thing is agents did get smarter to the standpoint where they understood customer basic questions. So 18 to 20% increase in first contact closures. Again, less repeat calls, less emails. The next stat, we actually increased the capacity of new hires. So we increased overall agent efficiencies. There was less of a skill gap in the areas of 30 to 35%. And here's kind of the kicker, the very last one. It might not be average handle time is what we want to go after. And I've heard a lot of shifts back and forth. First contact closures is huge for customer experience. But overall, if you're still looking at workforce management, if you have a 35 to 40% improvement in call time consistency, regardless of whether AHT goes up 2 seconds or 1 second, if everyone is on the same call for the same amount of time and I have a consistent skill gap and I have a consistent conversation, all the other tools you use for efficiencies such as workforce management and staffing all start to become more effective. So at the end of the day, not necessarily about AHT, but the overall effect was much more manageable from a service capacity perspective. And it's all about not necessarily controlling the supply, but managing the demand. The next thing I wanted to talk about is why is eliminating content a good thing? When is less more? Well, obviously, if you're in PR, having your executives or your public-facing people talk less is probably a little bit better from the end of the day. But around knowledgement, why am I not promoting more knowledge is better knowledge? And let me kind of tell you why. And in order to do that, I thought I'd take you down to 3 scenarios. And when I first did this, I said, okay, who's the Transversal showcase customer I want to show? And I thought, well, I've got Gary Lucas on the call. Let's use Gary Lucas's site. And I kind of surprised Gary earlier by telling him this when we were on our pre-webcast. But I think you're going to find it's a great, great story. So I said, all right, let me just choose 3 insurance companies, Gary's company being the last one. And let me go to a scenario that makes sense. Not a hard scenario, not one that works for First Central, but a scenario that I would understand. So I basically picked the following. I know when I go on vacation or if I go to rent a car and I'm on business, I never know how to answer the question, should I get the rental car insurance? Because it's expensive. It's a kind of an unnecessary expense if my corporate credit card will cover it, or if my personal credit card will cover it, or if my personal insurance covers me under the rental car insurance. So I said, okay, I'm going to go to three well-known sites, one in the U.S. and one in the U.K. to compare Gary's company against. And I'm going to ask the simple question, does my insurance cover rental cars? And let me kind of take you down a tale of 3 different stories. So I went to Allstate's site. And it's pretty straightforward. On the very top, you're going to see I've got a support button. So I kind of went to support button. And on the main page of the support site was 21 static FAQs. Now, why am I calling them static? Because it was basically one page. I couldn't click on one and go to another page or drop down different FAQs, or it was just one long list of FAQs. And they were pretty basic stuff about payments and billings and how to contact us, and pretty straightforward stuff that you'd expect to be on a simple FAQ page. But there were no FAQs for car insurance or any other insurance policy I might have with Allstate. So that was one thing I thought was interesting. So I said, okay, I'm not going to find anything on the main support page. Maybe I need to go over to Tools and Resources. I went over to Tools and Resources, and I saw a page of icons and some hot topics, and I drilled into a few, but there was no search on the page, and as I scrolled down, there were many, many pages, hundreds of different tools and topics and resources for me to browse through. So that's kind of frustrating as an advanced user because I just want to see if I can basically get rental car insurance. So I did a search on the browser, so I did a Control F to search the page for rental car insurance, and I found nothing. So I said, well, it's probably under the My Account login. So as a customer of Allstate, I could probably ask questions on my policy. So I kind of went over to the My Account login. I kind of tried to do a fake login. I really couldn't get into doing a fake login. Allstate was smart enough to know I wasn't a customer and didn't let me in, so I couldn't explore the member area. So I basically went back to the main site and on the support site and did a search. And I searched for the following: does my insurance cover rental cars? And as you're seeing what I've circled here, if you can see it well enough, about 23,484 articles. I only have so much patience, so I basically went through the first 3 to 4 pages and scanned through and did a Control F to see if I could find rental cars, and I didn't really find anything. And at this point I said, all right, you know what, I'm just going to go out to Google and see if I can find my answer there. So I left the Allstate support site. Now, in all fairness, I can't say, does my insurance cover rental cars on Google? So I basically put in, does my Allstate insurance cover rental cars? And I did find my answer, and it was halfway down the page, and it kind of linked back to the Tools and Resource section that I couldn't originally find my problem. At the end of the day, I did find my answer. I didn't find it using Allstate's site. I found it through Google, and it took me somewhere in the vicinity of about 25 minutes. So I think I'm an okay customer, but way too long for me from the standpoint of finding what I considered a very simple question. Let me take you through another journey. So I decided to go to Aviva. And on Aviva's website, it wasn't apparent pretty quickly where I could find my issue, where support was, but it said it's probably on the far right-hand side under existing customers. So I did click on the existing customers, and this is kind of the page you see. And on the right-hand side, halfway down the page, you're going to see I have browse to our FAQs, browse our FAQs. I'm not sure why they put browse, because the only thing you can really browse is the drop-down, which basically says, do you want motor insurance, home insurance, what kind of insurance? So I went to the car insurance section. And basically I had 10 FAQs, really static. As a matter of fact, they were like, the first one was welcome to our FAQs. Now, when your first FAQ is welcome to our FAQs, you know they're trying to fill stuff in. So I knew it wasn't going to be very dynamic, so there wasn't a lot I could find there. So I basically abandoned that pretty quickly and decided on the left-hand side, if you have a question, well, that would be the natural approach for me to do. So I basically did search, does my car insurance cover rental cars? And in Aviva's case, I came up with 330 articles. I said, all right, it's a little bit smaller. That's better. Less is more. Let's take a look through the first 5. Didn't find anything. I went to the next 5, and it started to kind of partially answer my question, like, can I drive other people's cars? And I'm like, no, that means if I'm going to a friend's house or a relative, can I drive their car and be covered? That doesn't mean rental cars. Because I really care if I get an accident in a rental car, do I get covered there? Not can I get covered on their car. So I couldn't quite find my answer. I found pieces of it, but my experience was when I clicked on the article, I didn't have a back button. So if I read an article, I'd have to start all over again. Now, what means starting all over again is I have to put back in, does my insurance cover car rentals, and hit search, and then go back to the 5th page and keep looking. Well, after about 25 minutes of that, I got pretty frustrated. That didn't make any sense. So I said, all right, let me just go back to Google, and in respect to Aviva, let me put in, does my Aviva car insurance cover rental cars? About 96,000 Google results, and nothing from Aviva on the first page, but there were 2 kind of glaring results that came into some customer forums, and it said Aviva doesn't cover car rentals. And I'm like, all right, so it's a forum, so I'm not sure if I'm going to believe it or not. It's not Aviva's forum. So I kept looking, and, at the end of the day, I couldn't find anything from Aviva on this topic, so kind of left with the assumption, is it true? If I were an Aviva customer in respect to Aviva, I would certainly call their call center at this point. Not a great self-service example, but I would certainly call and get my answer. But at the end of the day, as a consumer, I spent about 30 to 40 minutes of research time, and I got no real answer. So far, not a great customer experience, but again, lots of information, a lot of documents. Let me take you through the First Central experience. And I didn't do this on purpose because here's the funny part. When I went to First Central, it was pretty straightforward, and Gary showed you the site. Need help was at the top. I'm like, all right, this is great. So the first site that I've been to, I can find it pretty quickly. The next thing, when I clicked on it, I had some popular FAQs. Instantly they came up, and I knew that they were kind of dynamic because it said popular FAQs, and there were many of them, many pages of them, and I could filter them by the left-hand side, by car insurance, by pet insurance, or by sections underneath car insurance. But I said, you know what? I'm going to search. Does my insurance cover rental cars? And if you can see my top answer, it says, who insures the hire car? Now, I've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to work for Transversal, a UK-based company, for the past year and a half, and I can tell you on a daily basis I have a vocabulary education every day. So I'm like, all right, this is fun. What does the hire car actually mean? And it means a rental car, which I didn't know. So I'm like, all right, in fairness, let me go back to at least Aviva's site and let me search for hire car. I had no better results. Let me go to Google and search for Aviva hire car, and I found no results. So I did go back to the other sites to see if I could use hire car instead of rental car. The cool thing is this is a UK site. I used the word rental car, and it did find my answer. As a matter of fact, not only did it find my answer, it only gave me 8 results. It didn't give me the entire knowledge base. It said, here are the 8 articles, and the top one was my answer. The cool thing was I went back to the main site on First Central, and I tried that same result on their site search, and I came right back here. Who insures the hire car? I had the same exact result. I literally found my answer in less than the time that I told you how I did it, less than 2 minutes. So I was really excited about, hey, it's working on one of our customer sites. But let me take this experience a lot deeper, because in respect to all the things that Gary is doing, he's really fine-tuning what he's doing with knowledge management. So if I drill in and I actually click on who insures the hire car, here's the great thing. Look at the first summary line right below it. The simple answer is the hire car is insured by the Ultimate Insurance Company as part of the policy. Fantastic. My answer is already there. I don't have to go deeper. So what is this view of full working policy wording? So I did click into that full working policy, the policy wording. And the great thing is I probably had about 15 more questions I didn't ask that I would probably get the minute I stood up to the counter at Hertz or Rent-A-Car to say, I'm covered by First Central. They'd probably start drilling me if it's a good sales guy. Are you covered for this? Are you covered for that? What kind of car do you have? And I'd probably buy the insurance policy from the rental car guy. But in this instance, when I drilled into the 8-page comprehensive PDF, it told me exactly what First Central was covering. It told me exactly what it wasn't covering, and it gave me more information than I thought I needed when I started. Further to that, when you look down below, it asks questions. It actually gives me related questions. So it actually gives me kind of answers, anticipates the questions I might ask next, like what sort of hire car can I get with this kind of insurance policy, which is great in case I want to rent kind of an exotic car or maybe a four-wheel drive vehicle. So really good, and it also gave me some interactivity. It gave me the ability to say, was this answer helpful? And yes, Gary, I did click on the 5th star. I gave you all 5 stars there, and I only did it once. I didn't want to skew your analytics. So in respectful, it was a great self-service experience. And what I felt like is I really received an intentional structured information that fully answered my inquiry. Anything that I could possibly wrap around that experience, the First Central team really understood what I was going after. So I was pretty excited. So also let's take a look at First Central's Google results. So I wanted to go back to the same thing and type in, does my First Central insurance cover rental cars? And nice thing about First Central is they're smart enough to do a Google ad, so they got their Google ad stuff at the very top. But the First Central, if you look at the first 3 things below the Google ad, they're all ask a question First Central insurance. Ask First Central's knowledge articles were ranked the top 3. And that the top Google result was my actual answer, and among 10.5 million Google results. So the great thing is when I clicked on, does my policy cover my other cars, it took me right back to First Central's Ask First Central site, and the whole answer experience was repeated. And as far as I'm concerned, if I never went to First Central site, that was even easier. I used my browser, I got driven into the First Central site, and all the things I just talked about from the experience of drilling into more content, looking at additional questions, took into place. So, to recap, why is eliminating content a good thing? browsing or searching broad content never results in a great self-service experience. I think a lot of us, as we use Google as our research tool, know that we only have so much patience or only so much time there. But I think when you look at what Gary and his team are doing, rolling out a richer subset of targeted key content is really key in doubling online satisfaction. And here are some statistics that I've gathered over my 20 years of experience in this space. 80 to 90% of normal service inquiries in a customer service environment today are typically resolved by 15 to 20% of the content. Some advice given by customers when they were on the agent side how to roll it out to the consumer side is only structure 15% of your mature internal content for self-help rollouts. You don't need to give customers everything, just the things you think they're going to ask you for in relation to good web self-service or self-help. The great thing about this, for those of you working on multilingual sites and a global perspective rollout for web self-service, is this approach of really giving targeted content can save tens to hundreds of thousands in translation costs. The next thing is the actual targeted content yields serious results. In the customers that we measured in their self-service audit, 50 to 60% reduction in their assisted support incidents with rolling out this targeted content, and a double-digit increase in customer satisfaction. And what I think I just hopefully just kind of experienced that journey with you. The experience of the online customer is everything. And here's some really interesting statistics that when you drill into it, and it kind of dovetails the last webinar we talked about churn. Businesses have achieved a 2% lower churn rate for their active online customers. If there are any retailers on the phone, the statistics I have around what active online customers do, they purchase 10% more online commerce than customers that aren't active from a service perspective. Accenture estimates the annual churn is a $5.9 trillion problem. And the interesting thing how that relates to Gary's business for insurance companies, the majority of new customer acquisitions in the insurance industries are not new people. They're people who switched from a competitor. So it's not net new households or car insurance companies. It's people coming from other insurers. And the annual churn rates are about 8 to 5% for auto and home respectively. And if that doesn't ring true to you, anybody watching television on an hourly basis would know there is a U.S. Insurance ad coming up every hour on the hour. And I'm not sure if that's the same in the UK because I don't watch a lot of UK television. I'm sure it might make sense. But insurers globally spend about $500 billion on advertising to acquire new customers. So churn has to be up there from that standpoint. I'll kind of net it out a little bit and give you kind of wrap the webinar up here a little bit, give you some warning signs that you can see. And some of them are a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but pretty obvious that your KM, your knowledge initiatives aren't working. Kind of the first one is email escalations do not decrease. As a matter of fact, in many cases, they might increase. If I think I found my initial problem on Gary's website and he didn't provide the full policy or the other things, I might have additional questions and probably would escalate that to an email saying, well, what's actually covered? Or do you cover maybe high-end cars or luxury cars? But the reality of it is customers are only going to make so many attempts. And the average is customers will abandon self-service after 5 failed attempts. Worse, that these failed attempts will drive 27% incremental service contacts. Almost better in some cases not to do any web self-service than to do a failed one. And the next example I'll talk to you about is, and this is kind of always a funny one to me when you go into contact centers, is saying, hey, we just deployed a great knowledge tool on our website, on our agents to kind of integrate with our CRM, but we're having a difficult time with search. So what we decided to do is add KM search to our tool training agenda. What are the top initiatives that a knowledge project should do to reduce training time? As a matter of fact, you just kind of want to put them in front of the KM tool and have that do the work for them and find the answers. So if you're looking at reducing training time and your KM tool is adding to your training agenda, well, from my perspective, you either have a lousy search engine, you could have an overabundance of content, or we've seen in many cases you're probably still using Microsoft SharePoint as your KM solution. Probably the number one complaint we see about Microsoft SharePoint is not finding anything. And the last one, and it's not the case in Gary's because he's doing a phenomenal job drilling in, you're probably flying blind. You have lots of reports that you see on a daily basis coming from KM, knowledge gap reports, missed search reports, but you're not sure how to measure what is working or how to fix or fine-tune what isn't working. Or lastly, kind of an interesting one is how to anticipate or monitor what is trending. This is kind of a current theme that we've heard from a lot of our current customers, and this might be also new to Gary, but what I'd also like to do is kind of give you a sneak peek at what Transversal is doing in the upcoming year, specifically in the areas of metrics. Coming in February of this year, Transversal really wants you to be the first to know what's going on. We want you to know what social topics are trending to levels that might require immediate attention. We also want you to be the first to know what search attempts are recurring to a point that could escalate to other channels. We also want you to know what email subjects are spiking to volumes of unusual levels. And we're not doing this so that you can create a case, that you can add more workload. We're really doing this to give you the insight to be the first to know so that you can insulate your support center organization with knowledge. What we really want to try to provide you with is new levels of responsiveness to give you the ability to have new levels of responsiveness with next generation insight. And that's give you a sneak peek. I think coming in the new year, we'll take this to a different level, but just kind of some of the new innovations we're doing around the area of really drilling into knowledge insight. And with that, I'll wrap the webinar up and turn it back to David to open up for Q&A.
All right, great. Thank you for that. Okay, so we are now ready to begin our question and answer session. And I do have a few questions for our presenters, so I'll start with those. But I also would like to encourage our viewers to submit your own questions if you have any. If you'd like to do so, simply type your question into the question box and click on the submit button. As I stated earlier, we'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but if your question has not been answered during the show, you will receive an email response to it within a few days. All right, great. So with that, let me bring Gary, kick things off with Gary here. I have a question here for you, Gary. Are there any reports or data you share with management to help with ongoing support?
Sure. We have a monthly report. It's probably 10, 12 pages, which looks at usage. It looks at the trending. It looks at the scores. It looks at how many additional questions we have added. It looks at any particular, I suppose, alerts from one month to the next, albeit we don't wait a whole month before we look at the data, but identifies any particular areas of concern or interest from customers that we feel that we need to address. In addition to the monthly report, we then take extracts from that, which go into my customer position report, which is viewed at a commercial trading board meeting on a monthly basis, which again looks at what particular queries are customer raising, why are they raising them, how can we address those particular queries. So it's very much front of mind in addition to the volume. As the expectation is that as customers get to know that you have this facility, then there will be increased usage. We should then learn from their requirements, which I'd like to think that we do, and then take those findings to feed it back into the business and try and remove the need for the questions in the first instance. So it's incredibly important to us, and I have a team of 2 people that look after this for me, and then I in turn obviously present a number of the findings further up the line to my directors.
All right, great. Thanks for that, Gary. Another question for you. Why did you start with self-service before implementing agent-facing knowledge, and what challenges, if any, do you expect from your internal project?
That's a fair question, and I'm aware that other organizations have actually done it the other way around. And for me, it was quite easy, really. For a start, customer-facing afforded the ability for customers, as I mentioned previously, to access 24 hours a day. Agent-facing, whilst it would obviously help with their training, it doesn't really help the customer if it's outside of our opening hours. So that was quite an easy one. Essentially, again, we're trying to remove calls or remove the need for customers to have to call in the first place. So by giving them the ability to self-serve, they can find the answer to the question in a time that suits them, which again saves another call, it saves the cost of the call, it saves waiting on the agent to give them the answer. As I mentioned again previously, whilst we may train our agents, with the best will in the world, they won't all give exactly the same answer every time. And as I say, in terms of efficiency improvements, by putting the facility in front of consumers at the outset, that's reducing the unnecessary calls into the contact center. So it's a win-win because the customer gets their answer quicker, and we don't have to put an agent on a chair in an office with a monitor waiting for that phone call to come in to answer that question. So it was,
All right,
it was
great.
an
Thanks
easy
for that.
decision.
Oh, sorry, I cut you off. My apologies. Go ahead.
That's okay. No, so it was an easy decision. I mean, now that we've learned quite a bit, now it's a case of how do we further inform the agents, for those customers that may still want to phone up.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that. Let's bring Chris into the discussion. Chris, you talked about how knowledge impacts average handle time. Does the order of implementing knowledge management internally first or externally first change this impact? And is there a best practice or vendor recommendation on where to start?
All right, let me just start with that. So, Gary, David, the funny thing is probably about 8 to 10 years ago, I would have said absolutely and given you a definitive answer on that. And I think David, when Gary went through some of the lists as why he did it externally first makes complete sense. About 10 years ago, I would say absolutely. You want to implement knowledge agent-facing first. And I think if you have that capability, I would certainly suggest there. But again, there's a lot of things that impact a deployment from a knowledge perspective, especially if it's internal, because you're disrupting hundreds, if not thousands of agents. You're disrupting maybe some desktop deployments on what's being done there. You could be disrupting time of business. And it really depends on what you're going after. If your overall knowledge deployment is deflection to begin with, then certainly start on the web. But that's kind of why I gave you the heads up that guess what? Most of your self-service things are going to be answered. Your call time might just start to sneak up a little bit because you're not getting those easy calls that customers can handle themselves. So that's what I would have said. Why make your customers smarter than your agents is what I would have given you that advice. But I'm also smart enough to know that a web self-service deployment is not as disruptive as an agent deployment. I also don't think you get the efficiencies from web self-service, but it's a smart place to start. It's a low-risk place to start. But that's what I'd also say, don't roll out everything. Don't roll out your entire knowledge base that you've built up from – and I also appreciate the fact that people aren't deploying knowledge for the first time. They've had several knowledge deployments iterative over the years. Don't take that old content and push it back out there. Take the content that's used on a daily basis, knowledge that you have sessions against, knowledge that you've seen work before, and just roll that out. But roll out a subset to start. Roll out more as needed as you see the questions that Gary understands, the questions that customers asking, gives an information. Roll that out iteratively, but don't roll it out all at once. Make sure it's a targeted solution. So I don't think that if you do it iteratively that you won't be driving call times up. I think if you try to roll out a pile of knowledge with a brand new tool, you'll be driving call times up, and you'll be driving incremental contacts. So there's not a best practice other than roll out your content in proportional generation, and then at some point make sure that you're educating your agents on the same time. So I think I've softened that approach than I originally would have said probably 10 years ago, David.
All right. Thanks for that. And it looks like the Pareto principle is showing itself once again. My next question to you is, where did the number for advising to roll out 15, and I believe you said to 20% of mature content come from?
That came from working with some pretty large global deployments through my 15, 20 years in this industry for knowledge perspective. A lot of clients that I worked with in the past had just tremendously large databases. If you look at somebody like HP and do a search on HP's website, you get hundreds of thousands of knowledge articles that are out there. And you can imagine HP, and just using an example, a random example, not a client that I've worked with in the past, having a very global deployment. And if you looked at the cost of translating hundreds of thousands of knowledge content into one language, if not 10 or 12 languages, the costs are astronomical. So one of the clients that I worked with said, hey, at the end of the day, we're only really, if you looked at the analytics of our knowledge base, we only use about 15% of the content. Why don't we just start there? And really 15% of the content is handling 80% of the inquiries in our contact center. That should certainly be sufficient online. And that's where that came from. It came out of working with some very large global deployed customers that said, hey, at the end of the day, when we did an analysis, a deep analysis of our content usage, 15% is what we're going at, and that saved them literally, I think for this one particular client, somewhere in the vicinity of $1 million to $1.5 million in translation costs for their content.
Oh, very nice. Okay. Good. Another question for you. With regards to eliminating content, what mechanism do you use to decide what goes and what stays?
And I'll share this question with Gary if he wants to hop in, so I'll give you a couple of seconds, sure, Gary, to see what you do. But I know certainly from a vendor perspective, all of us knowledge vendors will give you some example or some analytics in regards to what content is being used, whether it be very obvious that agents are rating it 5 stars, or whether it be subjective in regards to those being clicked on from a session perspective. But we also do is we'll give you some kind of aging. We'll also give you some ability of understanding how old some of your content is out there and how unused it is. And I'll stop there because that's going to give you the vendor perspective. I'll let Gary give you kind of the customer perspective.
Sure. Yes, it's fair to say that of all the questions and answers that we have, some are used a lot more than others. But the fact remains that if a customer we only get an access for one FAQ, that's still one FAQ that a customer needed an answer to, and therefore potentially we have stopped a phone call or an email coming in to our business, and we've helped the customer self-serve. If it's a particularly difficult question where it might not be sensible to put a full answer, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but you might give some information because every question may have a certain nuance, but then we could also then encourage the customer, give them a telephone number, or point them in a direction where they might be able to find alternative information. So at this moment in time, we have not, and I can't think of any reason why we would, remove any of our older questions. If anything, we're continually building on the knowledge base, because whilst it might only be 1 person this month, it could be 2 next month, it might be 4 the month after that. So we constantly refine, we review, we understand. If we get 0 scores, as in people don't like it, or the relevancy score is low, then we will look at that particular, both the question and the answer, and we may rephrase the question in addition to changing the content of the answer. So it's a constant sort of circular motion.
All right, great. Thank you both for that. It looks like we are out of questions as we're approaching the top of the hour. We'll wrap up. So with that, I'd like to thank all of our viewers for listening in, those who asked questions as well. And I'd also like to thank our speakers, Gary Lucas, Head of Customer Experience at First Central, and Chris Hall, Chief Marketing Officer at Transversal. If you would like a copy of the presentation, you can download it once the event is archived. And if you would like to review this event or send it to a colleague, please use the same web address that you used for today's event. It will be archived for 90 days. Plus, as a courtesy, you'll receive an email tomorrow with the web address to view the archive. And just for participating in today's event, you could win this Chromecast. The winner will be announced on December 19th. Please visit www.destinationcrm.com to see if you're the winner. This concludes our broadcast. Thank you for joining us.